Stories of survival from October 7th astound every listener because we're given an opportunity to understand the experience as it was lived and to internalize some of the elements of that experience and its lessons for those of us whose witness is from an outsider's perspective. It is experiences such as this one that I am so honored to be able to share. That of Atir Vinikov, a young soldier, a reserve soldier, who was celebrating at the Nova Festival and found himself not only under fire, but also in unique situations that challenged his experience and knowledge as a combat soldier and how it was to be applied under a severe, unexpected, and somewhat unrealistic scenario no one could have imagined. Atir not only shares his testimony, but he also shares the deep insight he gained from what he lived through, the very unique story of his survival, and the hero who saved him and the group of others that were miraculously saved from the hands of the Nukhba, Hamas, jihadist, terrorists. His story is one we can all learn from. It is a story of the diversity of the land of Israel and its people, and of the ways that we can translate experiences of survival into a lesson that we can apply in our ongoing fight for Jewish rights and Jewish memory of that massacre and every day since. I'd like to welcome you to our episode of A Jew Today with Israel Forever, and welcome you to listen in on this very original and unique experience of Atir Vinikov, who we at Israel Forever look forward to bringing to you and your communities every opportunity that may present itself. So welcome to our episode, and of course, be in touch with us at israelforever.org if there is anything we can do to help you as you face the challenges of living during these unique and original times. Welcome, and thank you for listening and being a part of our community.
Hey, Alana, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity for hosting me. I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Atir Vinikov. I'm currently 23 years old and I live in Tel Aviv. A son of Israeli emissaries, I had the opportunity to live and grow up for 9 years in New York City and another 3 years in Moscow, the Russian capital. Throughout my childhood, I was immersed in various American Jewish communities, such as the JCH of Bensonhurst, the JCC, the Kings Bay Y, and Ramaz. In 2016, I finally moved back to Israel, finished high school here in Modi'in, was drafted to the army in March 2019. And after passing a series of physical tests, I was selected to join the prestigious unit of Seyeret Givati. On October 7th, I attended the Nova Music Festival and survived the horrible massacre that happened that Black Sabbath. The morning after of October 8th, I drafted back to join my friends at the reserves and continued for another about 2.5 months of reserve operations, half of them in the northern Gazan Strip and the other half in the Gaza envelope in the kibbutzim. Definitely a complicated reality that we're currently in Israel, but our spirit is still high, and we look forward to better days, and I'm very happy to be hosted and the opportunity to share my story.
Well, our hope is that your story will not only be informative, but enlightening and inspiring for others. And so let's hear about your morning on that Black Black Shabbat, that Simchat Torah. You're there at the party, and by now, these many months later, many stories have come out, many videos have come out of this day. What can you tell us about living the experience in the moment? And why don't you walk us through that morning as you experienced it?
The morning of Simchat Torah, um, the whole it started first of all around 6:30 in the morning, by a very, very intense rocket barrage from the strip by Hamas. By around 7 o'clock, there is the police officer of the Israeli police that stands up and shuts off the music, and he tells everyone to follow הנחיות של פיקוד העורף, which I don't know how to say that in English.
Yeah,
Um,
the home front command instructions. Tell me first about that half hour, because I live in an area that has been under missile fire. So I understand that feeling that it gives you as soon as you hear the siren. And we know from some people that actually the music was so loud, and we didn't necessarily hear the sirens, and then they got notification. And so this is going on. When we hear a siren, we run straight into the safe room. So can you tell me about before they told everybody to start running and started to understand that this wasn't just missiles above, but also an infiltration? Can you tell us what was it like standing there? Did people scatter very quickly? Were there places where they could hide? How was it? Immediate chaos? Again, the missile fire is sadly something we've had to live with for many years down in the South. So can you tell us about those first moments and then when it took the next step?
yes, of course. The first reaction, as sad as it sounds, most of the Israeli society is used to these missile barrages. Even though we are super, super close to the Gaza Strip, we're about 2 or 3 kilometers from the border itself. The first few missiles, I didn't hear any sirens personally. I saw them right above us, and obviously when they shut off the music, immediately, Iron Dome, Kipat Barzel, it immediately comes into action. So you hear a bunch of booms, and you see what you like these fireworks in the sky that of these missiles being intercepted. And once the police officer, the police captain, he's not just he's like the head of security of the entire festival, comes up and shuts off the music and says that the party's over, people are disappointed. This is way before we even realize that this is a terrorist infiltration, way beyond what we ever experienced in the history of the state of Israel. This is just in the beginning. Slowly the barrage becomes a lot more intense. We're talking about not tens or hundreds; these are thousands of rockets being fired at pretty much about the same time. So we're starting to realize that this isn't something that's a usual barrage from the Gaza Strip. We and people start scattering from the area of the party. I went to the party with a group of about 20 friends of mine. Some of them from the army, some of them from traveling in South America. We didn't take our cars. We had a bus that dropped us off there. Slowly, me and my friends, especially the guys that are combat, start slowly telling people to start finding cars, and hitchhike towards the center of Israel. I made sure that most of my friends got out of the area of the party and found a ride back towards Tel Aviv, for example. Towards the end, me and a friend of mine, Avia, we find a ride ourselves with two more Israelis. We start driving out of the area of the party. This is still before we realize this is an infiltration. We do realize that something's happening, but not to the extent that we later figured out. Once we leave the area of the party and we make it right to the junction with the road, which is road 232 in the Gaza envelope, which pretty much is parallel to the border. The whole road is stopped. No cars are moving. There's a big traffic jam. I hear the guy next to the driver. I didn't know them personally. It's just a ride we took. I hear him tell his friend who's driving the car that their friend was shot, and she's asking for help, and she's sending location. And this is still before the hours about 7:30, quarter to 8 in the morning. This is when we first realized that okay, terrorists have infiltrated Israeli territory. Still haven't realized that we're speaking about thousands of terrorists. We're thinking maybe a few tens, which is also extreme. Um, so they're panicking themselves, don't know how to help their friend. I realize that this is something that we need to figure out more, gather more information about what's going on. I take a via, we leave the car, we start walking around the junction over there. I did know a few more of the party goers, mainly for my trips and travels in South America. So I knew a few of them. I was asking around what's going on. Eventually, a few army, the IDF a bit arrives. There's a car that arrives with a general, a captain, I would say. He comes out of this David, which is a armored vehicle. That he comes out. He's super stressed. He's not speaking at all. He's not really giving any direction. He's like running back and forth around the traffic jams. By this point, for example, hundreds of terrorists have infiltrated Israel. It all happened very, very quickly. By 6:30, when there was the barrage of rockets, the first wave of terrorists infiltrated. By around 8:30, pretty much the kibbutz of Be'eri, which is about a kilometer north of us, kilometer and a half, is almost completely conquered. Re'im, which is another kibbutz about a kilometer to south of us, is being under attack, and they're slowly closing. Obviously, Kisufim, Miflasim, Kfar Aza, Kerem Shalom, Nachal Oz, these are all kibbutzim that are slowly being attacked and by waves and waves of terrorists from the Gaza Strip. Another police officer runs by. He's shot by his chest. He's bleeding from his mouth. He's yelling at us, "Run east!" That's when we start hearing a few gunfire from far away. I immediately snap out of it. Adrenaline kicks in. I grab a via my friend. Look at the phone. Where's east? Which is straight into the fields. If anyone, I doubt most have probably never been to the Gaza envelope, but the Gaza envelope is like a bunch of flat fields. There's barely any hills or anything. Maybe a few trees scattered, but these are fields. It's an agricultural area, kilometers of fields. So we just start running straight east into the fields. The second we leave the road into the little creek that leads into the fields, we hear this massive fire, bullets flying everywhere. They pretty much closed in. I see from north from the road a group of terrorists running towards the cars that were jammed there. And the second the bullets start flying around, this horde of partygoers just starts running into the fields. And that's when we really realized the extent of what's going on, to some extent, obviously, not to the full extent. And we start running eastwards, me and Avil and hundreds of partygoers. And that's when obviously there's a few lessons that I learned from my survival. It continues to another 2.5 hours of us running into the fields, me and Aviel. Slowly me gathering information, whether it is from my lieutenant. Obviously, by 9 o'clock in the morning, I get a call, like almost most Israeli combatants to reserves, to Miluim. At this point, most of my team is on their way to the south, which is where our unit's bases, to gather gear and weapons and to join the fight. By this point, some of my friends are calling me and asking me, "Are you on your way to base?" And I have I almost can't. I don't know what to tell them. Listen, I'm at the party that you probably see on most of the. If you're not on your way to base, you're stuck in front of the news on this morning. Even religious Jews, I think half of them turned on their TV and on Shabbat morning, and they're asking me, "Are you on your way to base?" And I'm like, "No, we're currently at the party. They're shooting at us. We're running, sending locations to a few people. Grab my boots, give me a gun, get on a tank, and get over here because we have no idea how long this is going to take, and it doesn't seem like we're going to be rescued anytime soon. And we're just running in the fields with no water or anything, and no way to protect ourselves." So we keep running. I gather some information about which kibbutzim I shouldn't run to, which bases and army posts around the area, which I knew from my
mandatory service not to go into as well. By this point, Ugdat Aza, which is the head command base of the Gaza envelope, was also being under terrible attack and pretty much almost conquered completely by the terrorists. A few of the Mutzavim, Paga, Malz, Kisufim, Nachalos. These are posts that are right next to the kibbutzim, also under with huge firefights and battles happening at these posts. Which the first thing I would think to do, not even as a combatant soldier, as a basic Israeli civilian, is to run towards these areas for protection. And obviously, thank God, somebody briefed me earlier and told me not to do that, and that also pretty much saved my life. So we keep running eastwards in the fields. About 2 3 hours of us running in the fields. The hour is about 11 o'clock in the morning. We managed to get about 7 kilometers from the area of the party. By this point, the horde that was running into the fields scattered each one into their own direction. So by this point, it's me, Aviel, and we see a group of four, another three more men and a woman, and we join up with them. We start thinking of a plan. I also realized three of these guys, they're combat as well, each from their own respective units. We start thinking of a plan of what we should do, where can we go. We see this farm of another kilometer from us, and we're like, okay, because once again, to remind everyone, the Gaza envelope is just flat, plain agricultural fields. There's no real place to hide, and in Israel, even in October, the sun is extremely hot, and we're talking about 30 something degrees Celsius, and we don't have a lot of water by this point. I was the only one that ran with a bottle of water, and so we're about to be dehydrated. Before thinking about terrorists that are going to possibly murder us, we might be dehydrated and just faint there flat on the fields, and God knows what would happen. So we need to think of a plan really, really quickly and find water first of all, even before we find rescue. So we see this farm about a kilometer from us, but we see a bunch of figures that have their face covered. So most of the foreign workers that are either Thai or most of them are not Israeli, but they cover their faces because of the scorching heat. So from far away, it looks exactly like what a terrorist would look like. We're talking about these covered faces, um, driving around in pickup trucks, which is exactly the videos that we got from online of how the terrorists look themselves. So we decide to go around into the greenhouses that are very, very close to the farm, but it's not the farm in themselves. Possibly we would find maybe a faucet or some water at the greenhouses. Once we make it to the greenhouses, it's twice the temperature inside the greenhouses than it is outside.
Right,
But
right.
at this point, at least we're not running. It's I wouldn't call it a shelter, but it is somewhere where we can sit for a moment, catch our breath. Whoever has battery on their phone, my phone was about to die, so it was turned off. Sending out all these messages, whether it's to our parents, there's a bunch of lists going around of who's injured, who's shot, who's, God forbid, murdered, locations of people. After about an hour of us sitting at the greenhouses, and to remind everyone the temperature is twice as hot, we realized that if we don't find water now, we're just going to dehydrate and faint there at the greenhouse. And we can't drink the water on at the greenhouses themselves because most of them is sewage water or fertilized water, which would just further the process of dehydration. We muster up the courage. We move towards the farm. We realize that these are foreign workers and these are not terrorists from Gaza or Hamas terrorists. We make it to the farm and we meet a Bedouin man whose name is Yunus. At first, Yunus is a Bedouin, which is it's an Arab society that are part of Israel. They're Israeli citizens. They're Muslim Arabs. Most of them live in the south of Israel. But at first, when you enter into the farm and you hear this Arab accent, you obviously panic at first because you have no idea Yunus, even though he's not dressed as a terrorist or is armed necessarily, that what we saw he could be from Gaza, and we heard that even civilians are coming into Gaza just to loot, not necessarily to murder, to loot and take and burn stuff. So we at first panic very, very quickly. Yunus, as in Bedouin culture, they're very warm and they like accept you into their home very quickly, even though it's not his home. But he brings us into his office. He brings us water. He cuts fruit, pita, hummus. There's air conditioning. Really a moment of finally taking a breath. The phones are being charged. We finally have water to connect everyone. The hour is about 12 o'clock. All around us, Israel is at war. Tens of helicopters. There's maybe 40 firefights and battles going on simultaneously in Israeli territory. Troops, whether they are reserves or Sadir in the IDF, which is the mandatory servicemen, they're all flushing into the Gaza envelope and fighting these fights. Helicopters and bombs and smoke and everything it is just a war scene. But we finally found ourselves a shelter um, to really rest in. So we felt safe by this point, and we're rather calm. We ate, we drank water. We're about to even take a nap and lie on our bags. Some of us ran with bags. I had a backpack with clothes, for example, and we're about to take a nap. Out of nowhere, Eunice arrives and tells us that terrorists are here. We need to imagine a farm that is gated completely from all around. And so Eunice is walking back and forth all around the farm. There's obviously a few Thai foreign workers, around 20 of them, at the farm as well. Not really knowing what's going on, but they do realize that something not usual is happening, and this is a terrorist infiltration. So Eunice comes up to us. He runs up to us like terrorists are here. Runs back to the entrance of the farm, which he remembered to lock before. But once again, we're talking about Hamas terrorists, Nukhbot, which are armed to the teeth with RPGs and AKs. This barbed wire fence is nothing to them. A single rocket from an RPG would blow the whole fence apart. So we're at this point hiding in one of the buildings at the farm, which is pretty much his office or his dining room. And we, from a moment of being complete calm and tranquil, even for the situation, we completely panic. We have a few seconds to decide what we're doing. The only real explanation for us, the only reasonable thing to do for us that we saw was to hide underneath the building itself. Um, I have a picture which I can send you that shows exactly how we are underneath. Imagine a building with about a foot in between the ground to the building that's being held up by these cement poles. Really, really slight, a really small area to squeeze through. We squeezed through, me and seven more. We were six when we joined the farm. Eunice found two more, another boy and girl. So we were eight total at Eunice's farm. And by this point, Eunice bravely, once again, to remind everyone, Eunice is a Muslim Arab Bedouin, who's Israeli, but he speaks Arab, obviously, and he's talking to these Nukhbud about, from what he says, five or six of them arrived. We hear the conversations in Arabic. None of us understand what they're talking about for all, and we're terrified. Anything can happen. Yunus is an elder man. He has six kids at home. They could be pointing a gun to his head and forcing him to expose our location and to give us up. Miraculously, and obviously with Yunus's great courage, he manages to talk to them. Um, Obviously, this is a face-to-face conversation. Yunus is standing behind the tractor. He's obviously also terrified for his life, but they're yelling each other in Arabic. We hear stuff like Yehud, Yehud, which is the only thing that we can understand in Arabic. So we do understand that they know that there are Jews in the area and they're looking for Jews. And we see from around, at least from where I laid underneath the building, we see a group of a few motorcycles and ATV with terrorists on top of them, going around and looking around the farm for Jews. And miraculously, eventually they gave up. They believed him that there were no Jews at the farm. We were so scared that we didn't even leave. Yunus was looking for us a few, like 10, 15 minutes after the terrorists left, and we were terrified. We didn't make a sound. We stood underneath the building waiting for rescue to arrive, which eventually did arrive. Brave civilians from Patish, which is a kibbutz very, very near the farm, came with their pickup trucks, pistols, picked us up, the eight of us, on our way towards Patish, which by this point has about 700 party tenders. So we went to another kibbutz uh, to to rendezvous because Patish was so full. So on our way, we pick up more, but to the point where the pickup truck that we're on, it's a Chevy Silverado, has about 20 people on it, both inside and on the back. We make it to Maslul. One of the girls that hid with us, her father waited for us already there, and I'm on my way back to Tel Aviv to where I lived at where I live at the moment, where I lived back then. And around 5 p.m. I finally make it back to Tel Aviv. So that's how my Shabbat morning looked like, and there's a lot to learn from that.
So first of all, we are so grateful for you to share that, because I can see by watching you how you are back in that moment while telling me. Do you find that telling the story is therapeutic for you, or is it opening a painful wound?
That's definitely a tough question. I do feel that it's somewhat therapeutic for me. I share my story because of what I learned from my story, which is there's a few key lessons that I learned from my story. The first one of it, and I'm not a super religious man, is that life is filled with miracles, obviously, and moments of luck. And we do live in a world where both exists. So I definitely believe that leaving space for faith and belief can help us carry through challenges. And saying that, me being not completely religious is really, really crazy. That's why I it's important for me to share. Obviously, share my story to show gratitude to Yunus, a man who I owe my life to, and without him, I might not be sitting here speaking to you. So every opportunity that I have to spread his name and spread our story and give him the respect that he deserves and the gratitude that I have for him is always on my top priority. Which also leads me to another one of the very important lessons that I learned from my survival story, is to not judge people that are different than you. You sometimes feel lost in life's toughest moments. There can arrive people that are true heroes, and they will defy stereotypes and expectation. Yunus was a Muslim Arab. He saved my life, and that's a perfect example of to defy the stereotypes and expectations that people might have towards him in particular. And in general, it shows how diverse and different Israeli society is. But at the end of the day, we're all, when it comes to being a human being, we're all there for each other, which is also amazing. I have a feeling if I would have judged Jonas based on my stereotypes, I would have never believed that he could save us. So definitely embrace diversity and avoid quick judgments and stereotypes. And the third
Beautiful.
lesson, which is also a very important one in my opinion, is making decisions with clear and a rational mindset. For example, when we ran in the fields and I told everyone that there's this horde of hundreds of people running, it's important to really take a moment to think rationally. And obviously, luck and miracles played a crucial role, but despite the pressure and stress and fear, maintaining composure and making thoughtful decisions um, definitely saved my life. In addition to the miracles, that's a big reason why it's important for me to share my story, also to share what I learned from that, what others can learn from that. and of course to express my deep, deep, deep gratitude to Eunice.
Incredible. It's incredible to listen to you. It really is. And I've heard a lot of stories of people talking about running in those moments, where there was a decision that they had to make. Did they, um, I heard one story of a young woman who they had bound her legs and then left her for something else. And when they came back, she basically played dead in order so that they would just forget about her. And luckily they did forget about her. They left her there for dead. But then all of a sudden, all around her, they had lit the field on fire, or it was ignited by fire. And so she had to decide, do I continue to play dead and or suffocate to death? And these, in the Holocaust, we called these choiceless choices. Long before even the extermination process began, when the persecution began, Jews were often put into positions of choiceless choices. I'm damned if I this way or that way, and there's no right answer. Another survivor had mentioned that they couldn't decide, did they run with the crowd or separate themselves, which it sounds like that was similar to a decision you had to make. Do you think that those are lessons for behaviors that others could learn from in, God forbid, similar situations of terror? Or do you think that this is a unique situation that took place in the way that it took place and that you experienced it?
Can you repeat that question? I didn't really understand that question.
Well, if you have to be in these situations where you have to make these choices under extreme circumstances, is there something that another person could learn in terms of how to save themselves under such circumstances? Do you run? Do you stay with the crowd? You're suggesting that we make sure not to judge the other, right? You didn't judge Eunice, but also you saw the Thai workers, the foreign workers from afar with covered heads. So you're busy protecting yourself, not knowing who to trust and how to make the right choice. Is there any way for anyone to know what the right choice is in that situation? Is there a lesson we can share with others about those choices and how to make them wisely? And the answer can be no. It could be that there's no lesson because
It's
it
a
was
very
so
that
unique.
that's a complicated question. Obviously, God forbid, let's all pray that we never experience anything similar to what we experienced in the Black Sabbath. And to all everyone who's listening right now, recommending what to do in a certain moment when it's life or death. Once again, obviously there's a lot of room for luck and miracles. When it comes to making the right decision, it really depends on the situation. But it is important to really take the second and not let panic and fear and stress just consume you. Because usually, even if it's not a life or death situation, most decisions that you can make in life, when you let panic and stress consume you, most of the time we will make the wrong decision. I'm speaking from my personal experience. So even more important when it's a life or death, really take the second. Obviously, not saying take your time, take tens of minutes. Take a second to sit and think rationally, because running after the crowd is not necessarily what's going to save you in a certain situation. In my situation, if I would have stayed with the crowd, most of the crowd stayed around the traffic jam and the area of the party. And if I would have stayed there, God forbid, I probably would have not made it. So obviously there's a lot of elements of luck in my story, as well as um crucial and tough decision making. A lot of it is also instinct, pure instinct.
You
Obviously, the fact
mentioned
that I was
you
combatant
mentioned that you're
helped a lot.
combat. You mentioned that
Hmm.
you're combat military, and I think that there's a level of training and strategic approaches that you gained through that experience that assisted you. I think that you've highlighted those, and I think that also drove you, it drove you forward. It sounds to me that you were also these situations. We hear of people really trying to help one another, that instead of only saving themselves, they were very concerned with saving each other. So you had your friend, it's Adiel, am I right? Yes,
Yeah, yes, correct.
Abiel. And then by the end, you actually had a unit of people who survived together. I have to ask,
Hmm.
are you still in touch with the whole group? And have you seen Eunice since your survival on that day?
First of all, yes, we're in touch. Almost the entire group, 7 out of the 8, we are still in touch. We've met Eunice a few times since the 7th of October. Obviously, right after the 7th, the most of us, at least the guys, we went to reserve service. So the first time we met Eunice was actually half a year into the war, and we went to meet Eunice at the same farm where it all happened, and it was a very emotional reunion. We and he finally told us his side of the story, and we finally got to meet him as a person. He's a wonderful man. His name is Yunus Al Gilnawi. He comes from this huge family in Rahat, which is the biggest Bedouin city in Israel. He's super nationalist. He's Israeli to his blood. His family members serve in the security forces, whether it's the IDF or the police or the state the defense department. He's a wonderful man. He has 6 kids and really an angel. We owe him. We all of us our lives, and we made this short on the news. How would I say that? Katava. I apologize.
You know, after those who were saved in during the Holocaust, we recognized them as righteous among the nations. And it sounds to me that Eunice absolutely deserves that type of recognition. So the more that we can publicize your story and his story, the better for people to be able to learn. Most don't even realize that there are Bedouin. Yes, maybe they've heard that there are some Bedouin and some Arabs who serve in the army, but it is a rare thing sometimes for people to realize just how Zionistic they are, how they know that it is only because Israel is a Jewish state that they have a safe place for them to live. And of course, safe being relative in the aftermath of the Black Shabbat. But it's still, they're safe now because we continue, and even his own family continues to fight for Israel's defense. So you mentioned that you heard his side of the story. In that situation where you were truly frightful that he was going to turn you in, probably for a very large sum of money, as we know is a part of their pay per slay program, right? It's true when they fund the suicide bombers or other terrorists that go out, but it's also true that they do pay even local civilians, and we know about this from inside Gaza. They pay local civilians for their involvement in these terror activities that can be very lucrative. So it's rational that you would think he could be turning us in. What was something that you heard from Eunice about that encounter with the terrorists that you didn't know? What was something about his experience that was eye-opening for you?
First of all, Eunice was also very, very terrified. He told us honestly that he didn't think that we would make it because a farm right close to us, about a kilometer, where there was also a Bedouin man in charge of the farm, which was a good friend of Eunice's. He was murdered, and he received this information while we're hiding at the farm. So he knew that they were on their way or they were around the farm before they made it, and he finally saw them. So obviously he also filled us in a bit of
Wow.
the gaps of where he stood when he spoke to the terrorists, where the terrorists stood. Righteous among the nations is definitely the term I would use for Eunice. You can't take it for granted that every other person would act the same way in this sort of situation. Not necessarily that he would have been paid at this moment. It's enough for them to put a gun to his head and force him
That's right.
to cooperate. And if he wouldn't have cooperated, they just would have killed him, just like they killed his friend about an hour before. So Yunus was really at a moment where he didn't really know how to make a decision himself. But when it comes to last second decision, last second the instinct that he had was to be human and to save our lives, regardless of our identity, of our religion, of our differences in our cultures, and just plainly being human.
Amazing.
Righteous among the
Amazing.
nations is definitely a term I would use to him. Definitely, definitely.
Hmm. It's a question that hangs over everybody's head right now, which is how do we honor those heroes of October 7th while we're still fighting the war for our freedom? You hear the stories of individuals like Rami Davidian that saved over 700 people, by going back and forth. And even you mentioned that there were people, the friend's father who came and met, and you think about how on this road where missiles are being fired at cars endlessly, fires are everywhere. The chaos is like completely juxtaposed with what you're describing in this small space of the farm with this small group. It's like a microcosm
Mhm.
of this bigger event that maybe it helps our listeners and those who will, I hope in the future, also hear you speak, so that we can spread your story and Eunice's story far and wide. I think it will arouse respect for Israeli society that even our Bedouin Arab Muslims are incredibly supportive and connected. We often say in Israel, walking down the street, achi, we're all like brothers. And I think even while we're fighting this war outside of Israel, people don't realize that that feeling is actually being strengthened because they too want Israel to win the war against terror.
It's true. That's
So I
definitely
think that
true.
your story has a lot of lessons. I loved the way that you broke it up earlier into usable lessons, because I think that I'm sorry to say that we're seeing around the world a call for October 7th again and again. It's not always going to look exactly the same. And yet I do believe that there are survival tactics that even stories that I heard about October 7th, survival tactics were used that they had learned as grandchildren from their grandparents on random details they had heard and learned that helped them survive this massacre. And that is what
Mhm.
we want, that God forbid such a thing should happen again. But maybe the clear thinking that you are outlining in the way that you did, maybe it helps somebody cope with a extreme situation, because terrorism is everywhere, publicly in the streets. In the last weeks, we've had Jews attacked publicly, a millionaire banker here, and an elderly couple here, and a man in the street in New York, and a young girl in Paris. This is growing and growing and growing, and developing what I call Israel strong survival tactics is essential to being able to encounter and cope with each situation as it arises. So I think that you're onto something with the way that you've broken it down. Let me ask you, as I mentioned before, your combat training helped you in the moment. I have a feeling that your identity, experience, and your training as a soldier also helped you develop these compartmentalized approaches to survival, so that
Mhm.
you were able to say, these are the ways it happened in the past, and I have clarity. So now I take you, Atir, to my question. Did that clarity come right away? Right after you survived, it was 5 p.m., you get home, you drink water, you eat something, you call your family. You had mentioned earlier that you were already being contacted by your unit to join the reserves. Talk to me now about after you arrived to the safety of your home.
When I first arrived home, we were in complete shock by this moment. I live close to Rothschild Boulevard in Tel Aviv, which is this bustling street in Tel Aviv, and it's completely empty. The streets are empty. Only about a few police officers are walking around. So there's a very weird feeling around in the street. I turn on the TV, which is the first time I understand to the full extent
what happened to Israel on that day, because like you said, I was really invested in the microcosm of my situation, and to realize what happened all around us, especially at the Nova Festival, and in general in the entire Gaza envelope, it was really, really, really intense feeling of deep tragedy, to be honest. My heart was completely broken. I was shattered there in front of the TV, thinking of what to do next, which was very, very clear for me, which was how do I sleep real quickly and gather my belongings in a bag and run straight to my friends, to the reserves, which by itself, the transition um, from survival to immediately engaging in battle is obviously a mix of emotion, but I could say that I felt a profound sense of duty. The moment that I made it, the next day we drove all the way to Mitzpe Ramon, which is in the middle of the Negev, to where our base is, to gather our gear and our weapons. There's this moment of unity, obviously, to see my friends, which are more than my friends, are probably my second family. The team that I'm in right now. This is the same team that I'm with since I'm 18 years old. They'd made it already the day before. They were all ready. They were waiting for us. It was me, Avil, and one more. His name is Daniel. The three of us, we went together to the Nova Festival, and we all joined the next morning to our unit, to our team, to help in the battle. It filled us with meaning. It filled us with pride. We were another month and a half in the kibbutzim. By the 10th of October, I was already in Re'im, back where it all began, clearing Israel from the terrorists that are still in their territory. And about a month after that, beginning of December, we entered the northern Gaza Strip, to the operations there for an additional month and a half. And this time, when we encountered the armed terrorists, we faced them with the full force of the IDF behind us. And it allowed us to demonstrate the power of the IDF. So it was obviously a moment of pride and motivation, compared to the point where we were completely uh, defenseless in front of these terrorists back at the 7th. It was obviously a completely distortion of the situation. And obviously it's a mix of emotions, but at first it fills you with pride, and the importance of what we were doing it always stays in mind. And what happened and what they did to us on the 7th of October obviously is still there. And the meaning of this war, which is bigger than all of us. So we really, really feel it.
I can not imagine what that transition mentally had to be like for you, but perhaps it gave you that motivation to overcome the trauma by being actively involved in, people are trying to say it's a war of revenge, and it is not. It is a war of justice. It is absolutely a war of defense because we're taking out the terror infrastructure. But for a survivor to move beyond, in a way, the trauma experience nearly immediately, without even giving yourself time to internalize the depth of what has happened to you emotionally, um, then there's that line in Eden Golan's song in the October Rain and a Hurricane song. It says, "Who says boys don't cry?" And I can only imagine that in the reality you've had to endure, we see just how honest that is of an emotion. And yet there you are, running to defend, to attack, to be a part of saying, we will not let this happen without consequence. And we're going to make sure we bring those consequences. Did you talk with each other, the soldiers who were there? You were survivors of the massacre, and other soldiers in your unit were not. Did you speak about that context? Did you have to speak, or was there an unspoken rule amongst you that the purpose was the battle, not the trauma?
So obviously they all knew that we survived the massacre, but there was no real time to really sit back and talk about it. Obviously, we shared our story. It's not like there's some unspoken rule or not to talk about it. We told our friends, we told our commanders, we spoke about it. We spoke about our survival story, obviously, because there is obviously a lot to learn from how each and every one of us survived. But it was immediately there's a bunch of work to do, straight schedule, moving around, and once you're into the war, there's no real time to really sit and talk about what happened. You really have to be focused on what's happening currently and what could possibly happen in the future, and be prepared for it as best as you can. Once it was all finished, we I mean, obviously the war is still continuing to this day, but we finished our first round of reserves in the middle of January. It was the first time we really sat, the whole group, at least my team, and spoke about everything we've been through in the war, not necessarily the first day of the 7th of October, which in Israel,
But
you could
everything.
compare it to America's 9/11. Everyone can say where he was on the 7th of October. But really, what we went through the entire course of the 3.5, 4 months of reserve service that we had, including in the kibbutzim in the beginning, which the devastation, the atrocities that were done towards the innocent Israelis that live there is just heartbreaking. It's hard to explain what they did and
And my
to show
question
the
actually
kibbutzim.
still applies. My question actually then still applies. You were then a survivor in the situation of a soldier, and then going back to communities where severe trauma was experienced. Um, was there discussion between the soldiers and the locals in the kibbutzim, or again, was it a desire to let the pain, let the wound for right now heal while we are in our battle, even while you were there on the kibbutzim, because you're witnessing the smell, the remnants, the visual. It's a trigger for any traumatic survivor like you encountered, like you survived, like you had.
To be honest, I was really, really focused on our duty, on our mission. Obviously, the interaction with the local communities is very, very difficult. Most of them were displaced, uh, especially in the first few days of the war, out of the kibbutzim themselves. The few that stayed were members of the Kitat Konenut, which is each kibbutz, especially in the Gaza envelope, they have these few group of civilians that are part of the community that live in the kibbutz. That they're in charge of protecting the kibbutz. So they're the only ones that stayed, but the entire area became completely a military war zone. So the interaction wasn't as intense and daily as you might think. But what was happening is hard to explain. It's like a zombie apocalypse. At least the first few days of Re'im, Niroz, these were kibbutzim that were devastated. Half of the kibbutzim were burned. Niroz, which was a kibbutz that I was in for over a month, half of the population was either murdered or kidnapped. So these are kibbutzim that really, really experienced heavy, heavy trauma and just terrible atrocities, which goes back to distortion of the October 7th, of the tragedy that Israel faced and the fact that people are still blaming Israel as the cause of this atrocity and ongoing conflict. It's just so deeply troubling and truly breaks my heart.
And possibly part of what drives you to keep talking, to make sure that the firsthand eyewitness experience is transformed into lessons for others, because they are claiming that it didn't even happen, that the rapes didn't happen, that the killings and the beheadings and the baby burnings, none of it is true. They are claiming that the IDF committed some of these crimes themselves and that they continue to commit rape even in Gaza. The situation with the war arouses questions even in our own family around the world. Jews who, maybe for political reasons or just complete disconnect, have never really been interested in supporting Israel or supporting the Israeli army because they're maybe non-militaristic, or they, whatever excuse they've given to themselves. And again, no judgment, but they've been distant, and October 7th has awakened them, and now they're looking to learn, but they actually realize they know very little about the Israel's military defensive systems. I think that maybe we are able to learn from a story like yours, a soldier who is a survivor, who then goes on to teach, which is what you're doing. You're teaching through your story. Part of what you can teach is also about the resilience of being a soldier for the Jewish people. What would be your message that you would give to a parent, or maybe even a young person like yourself, or even younger, who lives around the world and is now awed by what they have learned, or they still are questioning the integrity of Israeli soldiers? What would be your answer? What would be your guidance to them so that they can have faith in you and all of our soldiers of Israel?
Okay, so I have quite a lot to say to the people that are living in the diaspora that I could obviously connect to them because I personally grew up in these communities and I was exposed to these different cultures. And the first thing I can say is obviously people have to understand that the pro-Palestinian crowd is often manipulated by lies and propaganda. They're misled to believe falsehood about Israel and our actions and our intentions. And I can tell you firsthand, obviously war is terrible and war is bloody, but the IDF is definitely, if not the most moral, army in the entire world. The lengths that we've gone through, not necessarily I'm talking about in a political sense, but as a soldier in the front lines, as at the bottom of the food chain, to the extent that we went to stay moral and to save civilian lives, is way above anything that the history of war has seen. In 2005, the IDF withdrew from Gaza, and we still to this day have no territorial claims and no true desire to settle the land again. So all these lies that are being told that Israel and the IDF are trying to settle again Gaza is just not true. The IDF's role is defensive and not aggressive. It's in the name of the IDF. It's the Israeli Defense Forces. And throughout history, we are repeatedly attacked, and somehow we're still always the ones to blame. This time we've been massacred, assaulted. We're still enduring rocket attacks from both the north and the south, terrorist attacks of indiscriminate violence in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria, all fueled by a hateful ideology that aims not just at Israelis, but at anyone aligned with Western values. So if you see yourself aligned with Western values and you can't see the light against the darkness of this war. It's just it honestly brings me at least some amounts of frustration. I can say from my personal experience that I witnessed firsthand the intense hatred amongst Gazans, and where Jews are just depicted horribly in books as if it's back in Nazi Germany, and children are indoctrinated with images of glorified terrorists, with people with blood on their hands, on their beds of little kids. We found weapons, and it just revealed a system where hatred and incitement are taught from an early age, which is the complete difference from what is taught for us. So, what I can at least say to the Jews that are conflicted in the diaspora is to stay strong, to stay determined, to really believe in the cause and not to lose hope. It's definitely a very tough and complicated reality. It's still not over, but at least I could say that most of the Israeli public and the Jewish society here is we're keeping our heads up high, and we're hoping for a better future, and we won't give up, and we won't be pushed around anymore, and we won't let this anything near what happened to the 7th of October happen, and we're going to try to do everything to make sure that stays true.
It is really inspiring to listen to you, Atir. You have an eloquence and an ability to transform your message into something that I really hope we can get many audiences to hear, because you do it with a clarity that allows the listener to say, wait a second, how is this story also a part of me? Because when October 7th happened, every Jew in the world was awakened that they felt a part of it. Even if they were not yet aware of the extent of it, they thought, wait a second, what is happening? This is beyond what we can envision. And now we're seeing these riots happening all over the world. We're seeing more and more people being attacked. And it becomes a question of how do we defend ourselves? Because staying strong with our chin up is great. And we're lucky here in Israel to have soldiers. But Jews around the world are increasingly afraid. So how can we give them some of our strength? How can we tell them that not only hold your head up high, but do this? You are a vocal young man. What would you tell them that they could be doing now to help be a part of the battle?
Obviously, stand up to these
They're
pro-Palestinian
afraid.
protesters.
They're afraid.
Pray.
Don't forget, we have to respect their fears. We have to be able to understand they do not want to
Totally.
be physically attacked. Go ahead.
I definitely understand these riots and honestly the majority of Palestinians, especially in Gaza, they seem to support Hamas and its destructive agenda, which targets not just Israelis, but the core values of freedom and democracy that is cherished by the entire Western world. So what I would do is not only look for my fellow Jew that would stand by my side and see the darkness of what these people are preaching, but any basic human being that appreciates the Western values and the democracy that we all are living in and we love, to see how wrong what they're preaching is. And they could go to a huge length and not just have crowds of Jews that are standing up for the Israeli, our self-determination as Jewish people, but the entire world, the entire Western world needs to see this and wake up. And if I'm not, I obviously understand nobody wants to get into any implications and fights or physical fights with any of these riots, but I could definitely recommend talking around and spreading the story not just to the Jewish community, but to all
Mhm.
the communities.
I think that there's something in your survival story with Eunice, the idea that he extended the hand of friendship, brotherhood, shared humanity, and helped save you. And we need to see more of that, have faith that more of that is possible. Of course, ever since October 7th, we're hearing of conversations happening in local communities where Jews are talking with their neighbors, their non-Jewish neighbors, and saying, who would save me? Who would hide me? And it all does begin with extending the hand, opening the door of opportunity, opening the conversation. And yes, hoping that people like Eunice will open their doors and reciprocate and be a part of this fight for freedom. You mentioned Western values. I think that we could actually say that it's any values. It's any morals. It's human values. And we might
Human value.
believe that, they come from the Torah. Yes, they're, Jewish values. And then they came up with Judeo-Christian values. And now it's Western. You know what? It's human value. And that's what we want to encourage people to celebrate and strengthen in their core communities, whether it's with fellow Jews, maybe you don't even have a same political leaning or religious leaning. And then you have other societies, other ethnicities, and creating those common value discussions. I really think it's almost the only way that we are going to save humanity from itself, because October 7th won't look that way again. And they won't have necessarily the type of military response that we were, even under this extreme reality, we were able to bring to life within a few hours. And yes, it's painful to know how many soldiers were murdered right away and how many cries of help were, where is our army? Where is our army? They abandoned us. This almost, point of accusation, until after the fact we realized they didn't abandon, they were murdered. And those who could, like you, jumped right into action. For somebody like myself, I never served in the army. I serve a different kind of battle, and I admire soldiers like you, especially the reserve soldiers. Can you explain to our listeners just for a moment, when you're a reserve soldier and you got your call, right? What does that mean? Do you have a choice that you can show up? Is it mandatory? When they give you an assignment, is it for a certain period of time? Does it come and go? Can you just explain a little bit about how that volunteer reserve service works and how it continues, by the
Surely,
way, for you?
sure.
Because I know that you're about to go back to reserves in another
Mhm.
month or so.
Sure, Lana, would love to explain a bit of how the reserves works. First of all, if anybody doesn't know, to all the listeners, in Israel, there's a mandatory service. Once you're 18 years old, both men and women are drafted into the IDF. Um, Slowly, at least today, it is a mandatory service, but for some reasons, people don't have to get drafted if they don't really want to, and nobody's forced to go combat. So let's start off with that. I chose to go
Sure.
combat. I chose to go into a prestigious combat unit. This is all voluntarily. Once you're done, especially combat units, we serve technically another 20 years of reserves, which means that a few months of the year, we are called back to do basic military training and sometimes some sort of missions. 7th of October is completely different, obviously. Uh, Israel is at war. So when they send out, it's called in Hebrew Tzav Shmone, which is which means that Israel is at war, and this is like the most emergency sort of reserve call there could possibly be. At the end of the day, once you're there and you're forced to go into war, nobody really forces you. If you're, for example, if you're frightened and you don't want to, and for some reason you can't, or because some you need to take care of something at home, it's not like they force you, they push you in like we're back in the old days. It's very civilized in that sort of sense. People really come for what they believe in and to fight for their homeland, for their family, for their friends. And when it comes to reservists, people put everything aside. We're talking about people from my age, and I'm 23, all the way up to 42 years old, people with women and children at home, people with businesses, and they leave everything and they come and fight. The thing is, when it's war, it's very the number one rule is, I mean, the number one thing they say about war is that it's uncertain. The uncertainty governs everything. So nobody really knows what's going to be like and how long it's going to take. But they hundreds of thousands of Israeli men uh, put their entire lives aside and went and joined the war. In regards to me, I was on and off reserves for a few times. We finished in January, in the middle of January, our first call for reserves. We were called back twice since then. Again to the northern Gaza Strip for operations there around Jabalia, and I'm going to be called again in September. How it looks today in regards to reserves is it's very irregular. It's not in the norm, especially because there's a war currently. But definitely the people sacrifice a lot, not only obviously their lives, but their lives, their living lives, but everything outside, their families, their businesses, just to fight this war and to fight for this homeland.
It is incredible the soldiers that we have. It is incredible the society that we have that has also been doing so much to try and provide for the soldiers who are out there in the field. There are those holding barbecues at night and bringing home cooked food. I personally provide some food for celiac soldiers since the beginning of the war, and also celiac displaced families, because you also have the combination, the families, some of that I've worked with, who are survivors of October 7th. The husband went back into Miluim right away out of that same obligation that you mentioned, that need to go back and fight for our freedom. And so the mother and the children are displaced from their destroyed home, and they're without the father. There's constantly a trauma and fear, and there's always the dilemma of keeping up morale. What do you think is something that helps to keep up the morale of Israeli soldiers right now? And is there anything that diaspora Jews could be doing more of? We collect letters all year round, but especially since the onset of the war, we have letters, artwork, messages of friendship that we've been distributing to units, in the hopes that they're lifting people's morale. What more could people be doing that isn't, of course, so only surrounding donations, which is a very difficult dilemma the Jewish world is facing. Everybody's asking and needing more money. But what could we do? And how do you keep your morale up for the soldiers that you are with and in your world out there as a fighter?
So obviously the unity that we experienced, especially in the first few days of the war, was just extraordinary. How not just the donations, but just the love of the people and the support that we received from pretty much every Israeli civilian. It was incredible. So I'll definitely seize this moment to call for more unity, to call for the love of others, for patience, for the love of our homeland. Find the good that unites and connects us. There's so much more that unites us than divides us. We just need to have the desire to find it, because right before the war started, the Israeli society was just so conflicted. And I think the Jewish community, the Jewish society in general, even in the diaspora, just so conflicted and so many opinions. And when the 7th of October happened, it's just like everything was put aside and people came together, and obviously the donations and the barbecues and the letters, and that obviously brings up the morale. At the end of the day, the soldier on the field, what brings his morale up is his brother to his right and his brother to his left. But to know that there's a support for what they're doing, that it's not just our obligation and we believe that it's right what we're doing, is just that everyone is behind us. That's what truly, I would say, brings up the morale, at least from my personal experience. The letters are also great. I received a few letters, and it's always heartwarming to see letters. And it's like a little child, kids writing letters and drawing for you. It always brings a smile to your face because you remember what you're fighting for. But definitely, I would call for the unity of everyone, especially the Jewish community.
I think that's one of the most important calls that we all need to be making. And it is sometimes achieved by shutting out the white noise, ignoring the hate, and you not coming together because they hate us, but coming together in spite of the attacks against us, finding the common ground that we have. I know that some of the soldiers I've worked with have said that what has fostered that unity is also being shut off from social media and learning just how divisive and toxic the social media encounters can be. Do you think that that unity amongst the soldiers will continue even afterwards? Do you see that today's soldiers like yourself will take an active role in the rebuilding of Israel post this war?
I would like to say yes. Currently, we're still fighting this war, and it's still very, very complicated. I wouldn't say that it seems like it's about to end super soon, even though we would all hope so. The war is still in the midst of it, and
Growing. It's not just also, it's not still happening, it's growing, unfortunately.
it's growing. Unfortunately, the northern border is just getting more and more and more heated. So currently, I would like to say that obviously the next generation of Israelis, not necessarily only the fighters in the IDF, but everyone who experienced it, the wives, the children that had to deal with this trauma and had to better from it and grow from it and learn to be a better human being and manage to deal with it in their life. Is going to be a much hardened society in Israel, and we're going to build the nation to be even greater than it is today, definitely. But as of now, most of us are still very invested in the war, very thinking about what's going to happen and how we can prevail and win and show them how we're fighting for our freedom.
B'yachad nenatzeach, because together we'll win. And that's true for the soldiers here in Israel, like you, and the Jews all over the world. Atir, I think that you have given us so many beautiful ideas and messages that we can inherit from you. I hope that it comes back on you tenfold, that you are given as much strength as you need to continue on your path for the future. I think that your voice and your message are very important, and we look forward to sharing it onward. And so, for all of our listeners around the world, we want to invite you to bring Atir to your community wherever you might be. We at Israel Forever are proud to present Atir as one of our members of our Speakers Bureau and help to amplify his voice and his echo so that he can have a greater impact directly on those who are blessed with the opportunity to listen to him. Atir, you are an inspiration for other young Jews, and I am thrilled to be able to bring your voice onward. I think that this should just be a beginning. October 7th was a catastrophe for all of us, but we see that it is awakening new beginnings also for all of us. And so we're going to use these opportunities in a positive, constructive, and meaningful way. And we're going to do that by making sure that the personal connection with stories like yours are where we can get the lessons, not from the social media, not from the propaganda and the lies, but from the honest integrity of a survivor and a fighter just like you. So Atir, thank you so, so much. And we can't wait
Thank you,
to bring
Ilana. I
your voice
appreciate
around
it.
the world.
Thank you.
You got it. You got it. I know that you go on after our discussion and you move on to, okay, how am I going to go to my next task in my life? Because that's what we're all doing, is living. Does each time you tell your story, does it give you a sense of empowerment? Does it give you a sense of fulfillment?
It does. It's honestly, it's also good, obviously, therapeutically, because it helps you compartmentalize the process of what's been through and to timeline it. I've told my story thousands of times. I have a feeling this time was not as good as the last time. I don't know. Let me know what you think.
I don't know. I disagree. I think that every time I hear, and I also remember the article that was done for you guys on, I think it was a Channel 12 it was. I think that each time when we tell our story, we get more and more precise and specific, and that helps the listeners. And I think that that's what we've brought to them today, was something that was very clear and purposeful. And I think that all of our listeners are going to be able to appreciate some kernel of wisdom that they have gained today. I want to mention the issue of the trauma coping as speaking as a form of coping. I think that the further we move away from the event, there are some who believe that we find more coping mechanisms. We even hear from some of the rescued or released survivors that actually the opposite is true, that the trauma and recovery is a bit delayed because we're still living in it. And so you're still telling your immediate story. It's not a story from a long time ago. So I hope that the talking and does help you with finding therapy for your spirit and for your heart, because I think that your telling actually gives your listeners a little bit of support and therapy as well. They feel more clear on choiceless choices made during the moments of survival. Maybe our listeners today, they feel more clear on, wait a second, here are some concrete recommendations for either how I can understand that experience of somebody else, or how I can build myself as what we at Israel Forever call a virtual citizen of Israel, someone who is ke'ilu, as if they were living here, but they're not, but they feel that connection in their soul. And I think that our global community of virtual citizens of Israel has gained tremendously from what they've learned from you today. So I just want to say again, thank you, Atir, and we are going to be with you every step of the way to help make sure that more and more people can hear and learn and inherit your story and the lessons you have to teach.